Hello, and welcome to today's vlog. Thanks for joining us. With me today is Kelley Garris. I'm going to have her introduce herself in just a second. Manning our chat is TJ Hoffman. He's the Director of Customer Success and Marketing for Sibme. And I'm Allyson Burnett, Director of Professional Learning and Virtual Coaching for Sibme. Thanks for joining us today. Today we're hosting our first vlog, and I did have to look that up. A vlog is a form of a vlog that occurs primarily through video. So it's exciting to be doing something I didn't know existed just even a few months ago. So here we are. Thanks for joining us. Please feel free to enter questions that you might have in the chat. TJ Hoffman will be manning the chat, so if you have questions about the Sibme platform, which is the platform we use for virtual coaching, he can answer those. Any logistic questions like that. We'll also be looking at the chat to make sure we answer your questions as we go through the work we're going to do today. The title of today's vlog is Best Practices for School Leaders and How to Guarantee Teacher Success. So let's go ahead and get started a little bit with that title of the vlog and deal with that first. Then we'll go into our objectives and introduce Kelley and get started officially with the content. So here we have this rather interesting title about guaranteeing teacher success, and I do want to talk about that a little bit and then have Kelley help me out, as I'm going to ask her to do lots of times today. So the idea of guaranteeing teacher success for us, that really encompasses a couple of things. First of all, instructional leaders or principals guarantee teacher success when they're very clear in terms of the expectations that they have for the work that teachers are going to do. So clear expectations is one of the ways we can guarantee teacher success. Above and beyond that, however, is not only having those expectations, making those expectations clear, but also by providing the support that teachers need in order to meet those expectations. It's one thing to set a high bar, it's another to help make sure folks can get over that bar. And we see virtual coaching as one of the ways of supporting teachers and assisting them in meeting expectations, leadership expectations in a school setting. So in many ways, I often look at virtual coaching as I see our coaches as Sherpas who have scaled the mountain successfully, who have oftentimes, in some times, have stayed in the classroom. Sometimes they've left the classroom to be instructional coaches or to become administrators or to move on in many ways in education, to become consultants and authors and so forth. But I see them as Sherpas. They've scaled the mountain successfully. They've had their own classroom. They've been successful with students and with student achievement. And I see them as Sherpas who are guiding the teachers that they're working with, the teachers that they're coaching, guiding them up the mountain that we have to climb in order to see our students as successful. So Kelley, what do you think of that analogy, the Sherpa analogy?
No, I think it's absolutely perfect. And I just want to add that, as a Sherpa, we're guiding people up, but we really want them to be their own individual teacher as well. And that's something that's really important to me that I stress with the teachers that I work with, is that, I'm not looking for you to become another me or another coach. I want you to become the best you that you can. I'm going to suggest things that worked for me in the classroom, but that doesn't always mean it's going to work for you, or it means that we have to do some tweaking. And that's the power of the video that I know you're going to be talking about very soon, is that I get an opportunity to observe these things in real time, and we can use that to guide the tweaking that we need to do to make sure that classroom is amply successful.
Mm-hmm. So I love that, Kelley, the idea that we know our goal is to reach the top of the mountain. Our goal is just student success and student achievement. However, there's many paths to getting to the top of the mountain, and I love the idea that we are good at individualizing that. We're not trying to recreate ourselves. Everybody has to do it the way I did it, but by showing them the way in some cases and helping them to see maybe an easier path or a path at least sometimes, right? So thank you for helping me with my Sherpa analogy today. So let's go ahead and get started. I have welcomed you. We have a couple of goals we're going to hit on today, and that includes just really talking about how struggling teachers, new teachers, and even experienced teachers can benefit from virtual coaching. I also want us to talk about some of the most common areas of need when we work with work virtually with a coachee. What do we typically ask to work on or do? What are some of those typical goals? And then I also hope that we have time to talk about outcomes. How do we measure success in virtual coaching? And having said that, then let's just move right into things. I do want to introduce Kelley Garris to you and then have her add to my introduction. I've already introduced myself. I will add a little bit to that and say, so over 35 years in education, I climbed many mountains in those years. 20 years in the classroom, 10 years in instructional leadership, and then beyond that, I've worked as an educational consultant, and that's how I met Kelley Garris. So I was working for a educational improvement company, and the district she was working in had hired us. And so for the past 7 years, I've known Kelley from that work and beyond that work. She is our lead virtual coach. And you'll see as we continue to talk today together, you'll see why that is. She has had the most experience in our virtual coaching services. She was our very first virtual coach. So we're excited to have her join us today. Kelley, would you tell us a little bit about your background?
Thank you. I have not been in education 35 years, but I have been in education 15 years. And in that 15 years, I wore a lot of hats, from a middle school teacher, language arts, drama, to a high school teacher, ESL, intervention, honors, AP, IB. I have worn a lot of hats. And then when Allyson came into my life 7 years ago, I got the opportunity to be a coach and really, truly understand what that meant and the complexities of what it means to be a coach. And I was able to be a coach in and out of the classroom where I had to balance either a 50% coach, 50% teacher, sometimes 100%, all depended on the budget, as we all know and understand. After that, I became an administrator for a little while, and then I've currently found my place in a community college setting where I'm still coaching community college students on how to be the best supplemental instructors. So I just can't get away from coaching. I love it so much. It is my passion. It is what I think what my place is here, to make teachers the best that they can possibly be so that we can do the best for our students.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks, Kelley. And your passion for what you do shows through, and that's one of the things I love about you, is that you really have a passion for this work. And I think that's true of all of our virtual coaches, is you have to have a passion for this work because it's not easy work. And sometimes having that passion and that enthusiasm is helpful. The coachee sees that in us, that we have that passion for learning and teaching and working with others, and that's helpful to them as well. So let's go ahead and get started with our goals for the webinar today. And we're going to kind of do that through looking at the big picture of virtual coaching, and then I want us to look really through the lens of the coach, the coachee, and the administrator. Those are the three roles that work together in this process. But let's begin by getting that big picture out of the way. And so when we talk about virtual coaching, I'm going to just give you the outline of what that means in terms of Sibme's virtual coaching. And then Kelley, I'm going to ask you to listen and add on, fill in that outline that I'm going to sketch for us right now. But when we talk about Sibme's virtual coaching process, we're talking about a 6-week cycle. And we've chosen to have that process last for 6 weeks because that's really an ideal amount of time. And here's why, is it takes a while to get folks who we're working with, oftentimes new or struggling teachers, it takes a while to get rid of some habits that they might have developed for survival that aren't serving them well. So 6 weeks is an ideal time to get rid of some habits that aren't working and develop some new habits and get into some routines and success with those new habits. So 6 weeks is really an ideal amount of time. More than that seems a little bit demanding, because we are asking those people who are being coached to give us somewhere between, and I've tried to calculate this one time, I think it's really asking them to commit just about 2 hours a week to the coaching process when it's all said and done. And it's a very repetitive process, which I'll walk you through and give you the outline of that. And that is, so for 6 weeks, basically what happens is we've been contacted usually by an administrator who has recognized they have a new or struggling teacher. They reach out to us. We do some vetting with them. We only want to work in situations where We have an administrator who sincerely wants to keep and help a teacher. We don't want to be part of the paperwork to get rid of a teacher. That's not of any interest to any of us. So we do a little vetting as to what role the principal wants us to play or the supervisor wants us to play. And then we begin the 6-week cycle. It's very repetitive. It begins with basically about a 45, 55-minute Skype or Google Hangout or FaceTime conversation where we see one another and we're talking together about the goals we're working on. We've been given handoff goals by the supervisor, 2 or 3 handoff goals that we're supposed to begin our work with. And then during the course of that coaching conversation, we move on to requesting what are called snapshot videos. We request usually two or so of those a week where we're asking the teacher to share with us in video moments of instruction related to the goal that they're working on. And during the course of the week, after those videos are shared, our coaches have the opportunity of using the Sibme platform to provide timestamp feedback to the videos that have been submitted. In addition to that, our coaches are going to share resources related to the goal that the teacher's working on and ask those teachers to read and review and think about and reflect on those resources that are goal related. And then the cycle that week ends by the coach sharing a coaching report with the teacher they're working with the supervisor, and they CC me. So all those things happen every week within the 6 weeks of that cycle. So I've given you the outline. Kelley, do you want to fill in some of the details?
The conversations, I'll say when we start to have conversations, one of my first goals is to gain trust and to just kind of listen. And as we progress through the 6 weeks, I notice that an excitement kind of brews within because we're trying new things. And I think the great thing about what our coaches do is that we create this safe space that allows them to be honest about where they are in their understanding of certain crafts and where they really want to go genuinely. And I really think it's a benefit to teachers to have that personalization. Nobody's interrupting us. They don't have to worry about someone listening or anything. It's very, very intimate. And I think that really, as I've noticed in my coaching, that's so important because I see the most growth with the teachers that really trust me that my heart is in the right place, and I genuinely and sincerely want them to grow. And when they can feel that from any of the coaches, they're going to grow and they're going to get excited about what they're doing, and they're going to be honest. Like we talked about before, when things don't work, that's okay. The first time around, if we think about trying anything new for the first time, it's not always going to be perfect the first time. But what we need to do is, instead of letting it go and saying that doesn't work, we come back with the video feedback that we have and say, okay, what part of this didn't work? And we talk about that. And that conversation can't take place without that trust and that safe space that we create as coaches.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this question. And I get asked this a lot, how can we build relationships with these teachers that we're never going to personally meet? We're never going to be in their classroom with them. We're never going to shake their hand. How do you build a relationship with somebody virtually?
I really think that, how do I want to say this? I really think that because they are typically most of our coachees are at home when they do these Skypes or Google Hangouts, most of them. And I've noticed that those that are at home in a safe space on their couch, sometimes their dog is sitting next to them, we are having a conversation. And I just don't think you can have that level of, and again, I use that word intimacy, that truthful, solid conversation in a classroom. I just don't think you can. You're constantly being interrupted with the phone calls and people walking in and, oops, I have this meeting I have to go to. Oh, I only have 10 minutes. I thought I had 20 minutes. It's not like that when it's at home. I encourage people to be relaxed. I encourage people to, just enjoy themselves and have this conversation. And I think the safeness comes with, at first, like I said before, listening. I do a lot more listening than I do talking at first. And I think that's so important. And I'm actively listening and I'm clarifying things because I want to understand the situation and the circumstances that they're in. I want to understand what their classroom's like with the video and also, speaking to them in person. And I think the listening part at first really does help create that space, coupled with being at home, being in their safe space, and really having an opportunity to kind of relax a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So Kelley, you've alluded to the fact that there are some differences between in-person coaching and coaching virtually. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yes, I do have quite a bit of experience coaching in the classroom, and I will tell you from the coach's perspective, we are oftentimes the go-to people to the administration. Um, we are people that are ready to do anything to help to make the school a better place. And what happens oftentimes is we get pulled in so many different directions that the coaching piece falls by the wayside. Even though our title is instructional coach, literacy coach, anything like that, we are sent to meetings. We are asked to help with test prep and testing and all of these things because, yes, it's all a part of making the school a better place, raising test scores if that's what people, if that's what a school's goals are. It's all of that. So we get pulled in so many directions that the coaching ends up really not being, I don't want to say not important, but it's just not on a list of things to do for many of the days. And what I love about the virtual coaching is it's myself and that teacher, and that's it. And all we do is talk about the art of effective teaching. And we talk about it in the deepest sense we possibly can. And we have a conversation. It's not me sitting there typing a bunch of notes. It's a conversation. And it really is rich and it's meaningful. And I do think we get some of those conversations at schools. I do, but oftentimes, like I said, you get the phone call up, you get the announcement, you get this. And I will be honest and say that takes away from the intimacy and the depth of the conversation because we're constantly going, oh, where were we again? Okay, what were we talking about? And that really does make a difference. And then 20 minutes, 30 minutes are up and we've got the bell rang and we've got to start class. From a coachee perspective, as I said before, you have that depth and that intimacy at home, and I think it makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. So I'm chuckling because I've experienced a lot of the same things you're talking about as a coach as well. And I will add to that, we have one of our virtual coaches wrote a blog last month, and she talked about the difference between in-person and virtual. And one of those differences she mentioned was the idea that there's just a little bit of a stigma to working with a teacher. The instructional coach is going in the classroom. Everybody knows that you're working with that teacher, and they're all curious about what you're doing. And there's a little bit of a stigma sometimes to the idea that that teacher needs coaching. We look at coaching, unfortunately, sometimes through the lens of it's a deficit approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not going in there to make somebody who's good great. We're going in there to help somebody who's struggling survive.
Right.
And so that has a little stigma to it, and I think teachers are very sensitive to that. And virtual coaching can be, as you said, very private and very quiet, and no one's aware that it's really happening except for perhaps the supervisor and the teacher who's being coached. But I also want to talk about, in my experiences, even though we may or may not have as a school instructional coaches or somebody who has that title, I do want to talk a little bit about the notion that, certainly principals and supervisors do want to do something for those struggling teachers. Sometimes they don't know what to do or how to do it or when to do it, but they certainly do want to do something. And sometimes in schools, they don't have the manpower, the bandwidth to have somebody who has that title of instructional coach to go down and work with those teachers who are new or struggling. What ends up happening is, and I call it the too many cooks in the kitchen approach. So typically a teacher next door comes down to the administrator and says, hey, there's lots of noise in Mr. Smith's room. And so the supervisor or principal looks around the office and looks for a warm body that they can encourage to go down and talk to Mr. Smith. And the next day, more concerns, and the supervisor or principal looks around the office and sees a warm body and sends a different person down to Mr. Smith's room. And by the end of the week, there have been 4 or 5 different people in Mr. Smith's room trying to help him with the classroom management issues that they're seeing. And there's too many cooks in the kitchen. There's too many voices because typically we don't hire somebody who's sole job is to support those new and struggling teachers. And even when we do hire somebody with the title of instructional coach, like you said, they tend to be used in lots of different ways. And it's where's the biggest fire that day. And let's send Kelley down. Kelley can take care of that. And it might not be to be coaching at all. So I think it's interesting, those things you're saying then about the differences. And I agree that that's my experience as well. And some of the reasons that I think virtual coaching is certainly one route to take. I will also say that I've known a lot of people who have had the title of instructional coach. They were maybe a teacher in the building, and they were an opening came up, and they were given that responsibility, that duty, that title, without a whole lot of preparation or understanding of what does that mean exactly? What do you have to do to be qualified to be an instructional coach in a building? And sometimes it's just that you are a content expert. Maybe you have no experience working with another adult and helping them, being their Sherpa and helping them climb that mountain. And so that's of concern to me too. And the beauty of our virtual coaching services is that everybody who's a virtual coach with us has worn that coaching hat and has worn it successfully. So we know that we've got the best of the best who are working with teachers who are new and struggling and have no time to be given incorrect advice.
Yeah. Yes. I oftentimes have seen coaches in other schools and some of my other experiences that, like you said, are content experts, but don't know how to give the content appropriately to students and follow the systems that are most effective, are research-based and most effective. And I think for me, I oftentimes look at the way things are done versus the actual content first before we dig into the content. At least that's been my experience so far with Sibme, and I've noticed that just little tweaks here and there make just a tremendous difference with any content. And that's what's great with Sibme also, is that I although I have not had the experience in a science classroom all the time, I have coached a science classroom, and I have coached through Sibme science classrooms, and I feel that the toolkit that we provide, or that I provide, it can be used anywhere. And I think that's really powerful for many of our teachers. Likewise, though, we also have principals that ask for content focused coaches, and we have that as well. And so I mean, we have the best of both worlds in this program, and we have such a great team of coaches. I mean, we really have something for everybody.
Mm-hmm. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think one of the considerations we make and I get this question asked a lot by the principals and supervisors, how do you match my teacher who needs coach to a coach? And we start with an information sheet that we ask the supervisors to complete, and then we typically have a brief conversation with the supervisor to follow up. But we do match coaches based on the greatest area of need of that teacher. And sometimes that area of need is classroom management. That's where we start. I would have said a year ago that I rarely thought that we were going to be coaching folks in content, but I would say that this year we've seen more of that than we have in the past. And that's fine. But I will say also that I guess I look at it three ways. We're either coaching for classroom management issues, we're coaching for pedagogy issues. So just good instructions, understanding that there's sort of a instructional cycle. Thank you, Madeline Hunter. There's an instructional cycle, and there's a best way of teaching people to do anything. And then there's the content piece of it. And I would say that 9 times out of 10, we're either looking to match somebody because we have classroom management issues and they just need somebody who's really strong in that area, or we have instructional issues, not necessarily related to content. So that's when I think it's fine. And one of my best coaching achievements happened in a science classroom. It was an in-person. I was using Inperson. It happened to be here in Houston, so I was going there in person, but I was also using Sibme and recording folks. But it was one of my greatest achievements, and it was a science class. I'm an English teacher. I didn't need to know the science content to know how we could improve things instructionally for that science teacher. And so we take this science teacher whose scores were student achievement scores were the worst in the district, to having the highest scores in the district and becoming the pre-AP teacher in the building. So it's just showing folks a few, oftentimes it's not more than 4 or 5 or 6 really important things that can make a huge difference. And that's the value of being a great instructional coach, is you're a strategic coach. You know the strategies. You know that if I can show these 4 or 5 things, one of them being perhaps something like a Kagan structure or Kagan strategy around how you're getting kids to form groups, it makes a huge difference.
Right.
So I'm glad you mentioned that sometimes you're asked to work with folks in a content way, not usually, but sometimes. But mostly it's those classroom management issues that we have to deal with first, and then it's the pedagogy, it's the instructional strategies, good instructional practices, I would say. So let's talk about a little bit about, in your experience, what would you say would be some of the typical goals you're asked to work with the teachers you coach? What are some of the typical goals you've been asked to focus on?
Typically, it has to do with some type of routine in the classroom, whether it is the instructional cycle, as we spoke about, and making sure we're hitting everything in the time. It all, honestly, right now, all of it comes down to classroom management and strong instructional strategies, really. I mean, even some of the people that I've worked with content, it really comes down to, are you giving too much time for that strategy? Are you talking way too much in class? Are you giving them a chance to practice the objectives that you've just taught them? We have to, first and foremost, what I love to do in talking about the listening in that first meeting that we have, and sometimes the second one, I need to kind of understand what's going on. And that the video helps, because we ask them to do a 360 video of their classroom, and oftentimes what they'll do is they'll, as they're going around, they're talking about kind of the systems that they have in place around the classroom, which is really powerful. Then in that first conversation, I delve in deeper and ask what those systems look like, because here's what we don't do in Sibme, is we don't add on more and more and more routines and systems if they're already in place school-wide. We work with what we have, and sometimes that requires us as coaches to do a little research on some of these, because we haven't heard of them, or they're brand new, so we have to do a little research. But what we try to do, again, is meld what's going on already in the classroom and at the school with some new practices or some refined practices, and we do this. We don't add on and recreate the wheel that already exists. We take the wheel and we make it better. And so that's really what I want to stress too, especially with administrators that are thinking we're going to come in and just, that's not it. We're not here to take over. We're here to refine and perfect what's already in place. And so I got on my tangent, Allyson. I lost what I was saying.
Well, I'll just follow up then, Kelley.
Okay.
So, the idea is that, and that's one of the concerns as a supervisor or principal is, we've worked really hard to have, let's say, the CHAMPS system in place, Safe and Civil Schools CHAMPS system, and we've trained all of our teachers on CHAMPS. And so I'm concerned if I hired this virtual coach from Sibme who's coming to us from a different state, who maybe doesn't know about CHAMPS, I'm concerned that they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and they're going to lead my teacher in a different direction than the rest of the building is going, and tell them, a different system. And I think so what you're saying is so important, as we try to work within the system, the systems that are in place within the school. And typically speaking, if there are systems in place, those systems are in place and were chosen wisely and for good reasons. So typically sometimes it's, you have a CHAMPS system in place, which means you have these very clear expectations every time you have an activity. But the teacher we're working with, even though they have the CHAMPS poster on the wall, they're not emphasizing that system.
No, or they don't fully understand the system. Sometimes the newer teachers that have walked in never had someone sit with them and say, this is exactly how the system works. So sometimes one of our goals simply is talk to your neighbor teacher about the program and what they do. Sometimes we'll ask them to go observe another teacher in their grade level. And come back and just see a half an hour of a lesson or a half an hour of a transition. And, I know, Alice, I finally remembered what we were talking about. No, we're talking about the other thing I want to say is routines, and talking about routines and transitions. Those are the pieces that I find are the crux of successful teaching. So often, one of the first things that a teacher will say to me is, I don't have enough time to get everything in that I am expected to do. We have to spend so many hours on this and so many hours on this. By the end of the day, I don't get to X, Y, and Z. So we have to look at that on a deep level. First of all, I have to fully understand what the expectations are time-wise and content-wise, but also we have to ask ourselves, are we using the time effectively? And that's really where a bulk of our conversation is for sometimes a couple weeks is, are we using time effectively? How can we shave off time? What routines do we have in place? And Allyson, you spoke so eloquently about having the administration set clear expectations. We as teachers need to set clear expectations for our students, especially our little ones. We say at one time and expect our little ones to go, okay, sure, that's going to happen. But no, we need to maybe act it out. We need to say it 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And even then we're going to have to repeat it again. And I think sometimes we as teachers get frustrated that I've said this. Nope, we need to find other ways to show them that this is the routine that we're following. This is the expectation that needs to happen. I just worked with a teacher that we literally modeled a kindergarten. They were going on their first field trip, and they had them put chairs in and everything, and we modeled what it looks like to sit on the bus, because some of those students had literally never sat on a school bus before. And we had to model that because, as we know with so many instructors, field trips can bring a lot of anxiety for a teacher. And so to relieve that anxiety, we model that behavior several times before we go on the actual trip. And when that individual came back, said, we still had some bumps in the road, but that bus ride was great, because they all understood what the expectation was. So the two main things I think that overall I work with are clear expectations and how long the appropriateness of a segment or a lesson is, and transitions. We can shave off so much time with transitions and making them accurate and the expectations solid before we even ask them to do anything.
So Kelley, I want to show a chart that comes from a case study we did actually with you and one of the very first teachers you coached. Before I show that chart, though, I do want to say that a teacher, this is kind of an old, it's been around the block a few times, but I'll say it is, somebody asked a coach, well, how many times do I have to tell these kids what my expectations are? And the answer is as many times as it takes.
Yep.
Yep. There you go. Well, let me share my screen. And what I want to show is this chart. This comes from, this is data that comes from, I think, the very first or maybe second teacher that you ever coached. And one of the things you were working with that teacher on was transitions. And here we produced a little bit of data based on the work that you did. And maybe you want to talk with us a little bit about what we're looking at here on this chart.
This was an elementary school. This was, I believe, a 5th grade classroom. Some of the goals overall for the teacher was more time for learning. I'm paraphrasing right now, but she, like so many other teachers, was saying, I can't get everything done. Immediately, one of the first videos I ask if something doesn't just jump out at us is I ask them to tape their morning routine or their end of day routine. And in this instance, she chose to do the morning routine. And typically we ask for about 10 minutes of footage. I like a little bit more. I don't mind looking at it because I really like to see as much as possible. And in that first 15-minute video, she was not even close to being done with the morning routine. We hadn't even gotten to the bell work yet, and the video stopped. And so obviously in that follow-up conversation, we had a discussion of what was going on, what is necessary, what is unnecessary, and what can we do to light a fire under them to hurry up a little bit to get going, because they would just dawdle. Well, all that dawdling, as so many instructional coaches and administrators can attest, is all that dawdling adds up in the course of a week, and we're talking hours sometimes. And so we really had to work on shaving that time down. So that was our first goal that we met in a major way. She really, we really had a rich conversation, and we talked about a very strict routine on time. We incorporated timers and positive reinforcement reinforcements and all that good stuff. And we were able to shave off at least 5 minutes off the beginning routine. Then we got excited and decided to tackle the other routines. And so she immediately jumped, once she saw the success of the morning, she jumped in and said, oh my gosh, you have to look at my before lunch and after lunch, because we're always late to lunch, and the principal notices. And that was really a big thing to her, is that the principal would stand in the hallway and they were late every day. So I was like, well, that's not going to happen. So we had to shave off again. I asked for a video, and she gave me 15 minutes, and they still were not done with their routine. They still had not walked out the door. And so we shaved that by almost half. And she was on time to lunch for the rest of the time. And the principal actually commended her in the hallway for the wonderful behavior of the students, and that she was like first or second in the lunch line, which for her was a really big plus. Was an awesome experience. She talked about that for several weeks because it meant that much to her. And then we tackled the after lunch routine. And as we know, any child at any age, the after lunch thing can be a little tumultuous. So again, we tackled that at the end, and we were able to shave off almost half the time with that as well. So just an extremely positive experience. And that same coach contacted me at the beginning of this year privately and said, I just want to tell you that everything that we talked about over that 6 weeks, I've started to use from day one, and it has made all the difference. So I'm really happy with our measurable improvements that we had with this great teacher.
So important. And Kelley, you mentioned something there that I think is important as well, and that is, we say that we can start a coaching cycle as late as March and still see results. However, it sometimes, and I mentioned this earlier, it's just really a matter of taking some of those bad habits and turning them around. And the longer those bad habits have been allowed to be in place, sometimes the harder it is. Yeah. But the good news is when we start adding structure to those teachers' days and routines, it's not just that particular routine or that structure. The kids begin to pay attention a little bit differently. They notice that there's been a shift in the force.
Yep, exactly.
Right. So let me ask you this question. We get these handoff goals from our supervisors or administrators, and they are our starting point. And we ask for 2 or 3 of those. And the reason we ask for so few of those is that my experience, and I know it's been your experience too, is, and I think it's probably just one of the biggest coaching faults that can happen, whether we're talking athletically or we're talking in instructional circumstances. We tend to see everything that needs to change, and we try to work on too many things at once. So it's like a golf instructor who, in that first lesson, tries to have you hold the club correctly, your stance has to be correct, the swing has to be correct, keep your head down, follow through. And by the time the lesson's over, you've heard probably 45 different pieces of instruction, and if you can still hold the club, you're lucky. And I think instructionally we do the same thing too, is we try to focus on too many things at once. And what I want to do is I want my voice to be in their head, and that happens through repetition, and that happens through being really tightly focused on things. So we start off, we ask for just 2 or 3 handoff goals. And then I think, assess the greatest area of need. Which of these goals, if I start with that goal, which one is going to produce? And I like to pick the lowest fruit first, because as you said, it's all about earning the trust of the teacher. And I'm going to earn their trust when they see that what I've told them or shared with them or explained to them is working. That's one of the fastest ways to build trust, is even when they look at me skeptically, like, that'll never work, and they try it and it does work, now I've begun to build that sense of trust. So we start with those 2 or 3 handoff goals because we try to stay tightly focused. Our conversation is around those goals. The videos, the snapshot videos we ask them to submit is around those goals. The resources we share with them are in relation to those goals. And we find that within the space of 2 or 3 weeks, we're probably about to transition through some of those goals. Is that about what you're finding?
Yes. And you said it so wonderfully about the lowest fruit, because that's often where I start immediately. And I oftentimes too, I think when we get our 2 or 3 handoff goals, I think we see a connection between all 3. I think there's some kind of theme a string that runs through all of them. And oftentimes when we begin to work through one of the goals, the other two kind of fall into place a little bit. I oftentimes will only focus on one goal for a while. And like you said too, that builds trust, because I oftentimes will choose the goal that I think is easily reachable quickly. And then once that trust builds and I can push that tough love and kind of push them further with stretch them, if you will, to use some of these unique strategies that they might think are absolutely crazy. Then we start to see everything kind of roll forward, and we start seeing all of the goals being met in some capacity. So I totally agree. Too many goals will not work for our teachers. It's too much. There are, besides what's going on with this coaching piece, there are so many other elements going on right now with them, and the expectations that they have in the school. I would like to keep things small and give them a couple wins in the 6 weeks so that they can have that confidence. So often they've lost the confidence. They've lost their confidence, whether they're new and they just felt just downtrodden at this point, or they've been in their years and maybe their toolkit got a little sparse and they just didn't know how to find more tools. Either way, we're here to boost them and lift them and give them the confidence to try out some things, even with us not there. If anything, I'd like them to be able to experiment with curriculum and toolboxes and strategies that are heard here and there and everywhere, and try them out and be able to figure out what's going to work best for them. I'd really want them to walk away with that kind of understanding that teaching is a process. It's not an end product. And that we constantly have to be refining our toolkit and figuring out what works best for us, and that it's okay to fail. It's okay. And you just got to get back up, though, because we have students in the classroom. You got to get back up and you got to try again. And if we can walk away with setting that kind of example for them, I think we've really done a great service for them.
Mm-hmm. So Kelley, it reminds me of, I heard this expression one time, and it is, just because you tried everything you know doesn't mean you tried everything.
Right.
So
right.
I think sometimes it takes the virtual coach who probably has a bit more experience and has tried a few more things. And so to share with them, to say, yeah, I know you have tried 4 things and here's a 5th.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
Let's go with that.
Exactly.
So I want to continue talking a little bit here. So once you have seen success with those handoff goals, what happens next? Where do you go?
Where do you mean, in the 6 weeks or after the 6 weeks?
Let's go with that 6 weeks. Let's say that in the 3rd or 4th week, you've done a pretty good job. You're seeing lots of growth and improvement around those handoff goals. What are you going to do for the next 2 weeks? Where do you get the next target?
Well, Allyson, that's a great question. No, honestly, I always, because we ask for the 2 videos, I'm constantly keeping my ears and eyes open to what is necessary and what I see. When I post comments to the videos, oftentimes that week I post comments pertaining to what our goals are. In my mind's eye, I'm seeing a lot more areas that we may need to address at some point. So I think naturally I would just move on to some other clarifying questions to content, because I'm the kind of person that I want to lead them to a goal. I don't want to tell them this is what's going on and this is what I see all the time. No, I like to ask a lot of questions, and through those questions that arise from some things I see on the videos or a pattern I see on the videos, that oftentimes will bring us to our next goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things I like about the Sibme platform is not only does it give me the feature of a coaching tracker, which lets me to very quickly go in and see what videos are ready for me to review, but it also allows me to do a detailed session summary. So I can look at that video and I can type my notes in of what that my coachee will never see, but they're there to remind me, here's what we're working on, here's the progress I'm seeing, here, based on this video, here's the very next goal that we've got to get to. And I think the power a video is, as you're saying, it always is allowing me to see more than I'm going to talk about that time. It's always allowing me to see the next thing that has to be dealt with. And I think that when you're really good with coaching with video, you have to really contain yourself sometimes, because the temptation, because you can see so many things, the temptation just is there to say, oh, I could just make this one little comment. I know it's not what we're working on right now. And so what I've encouraged our virtual coaches to do is I say, you can make all the positive comments that you'd like. Every positive thing you see, please make a timestamp comment about that in the video. But if it's a corrective comment, if it's an idea or a suggestion, it really has to be focused on that goal. Otherwise, we commit this, we commit the worst thing we can do as a coach, and that is to help to make them be so scattered that they don't even know.
And it breaks the trust too. It breaks that trust again too. If you asked me to do X, Y, and Z, and we focused on X, Y, and Z, and now you're bringing up something else, and that's not our mission. That's not our goal.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kelley, we have just about 10 more minutes here. I really want to we're making great use of our time, by the way. But I do want to talk about, there's other ways of measuring goals beyond numbers, let's say. In other words, maybe some of the ways we have success isn't really measured in terms of, I have a stopwatch and I'm seeing that we've cut down 7 minutes off our morning routine. So let's just talk in generalities a little bit here, and thinking back to the folks that you've coached, what are some other ways that you either internally or through your conversation with that coachee measure growth?
I can talk about one. I can talk about a couple that I have, and it's kind of funny because I laughed out loud. Thank goodness they couldn't hear me. It wasn't live, but I was asking for a video of a routine of some sort, and it was so quiet that I literally thought that my microphone was off, or her microphone was off, because I saw action, I saw movement, I saw active engagement, but I didn't hear anything. And it was a time when she was asking for complete silence and individual focus. And I was stunned. I was stunned at the growth that had happened between the first week and maybe the third or fourth week video. And I laughed out loud, like I said, because I really thought that my computer was broken because it was just that silent. And that has happened on 2 occasions now, with us putting in those strong routines and high expectations and positive reinforcement and a lot of thank yous. That is a formula for some really awesome work in the classroom. So that would be something that I know I can't measure. I can't say, 4 minutes of silence, but what I can say is, that is something non-measurable that was glaringly obvious that there was growth in that area. Glaringly obvious. Watching students in a classroom where routines are the focus, watching students come in and not ask a million questions with the teacher and just readily go get their materials and sit down and get started, that's a win too. That's a win, because they, many students that don't know what their expectation is at the beginning of the day, after lunch, etc., will ask the teacher a million times because they want to impress that teacher, but they ask them. It's when they don't ask, they come in and just do what they need to do subconsciously, that we have a win as well. And we can't necessarily measure that on paper, but that is a true win for that teacher. Even if they don't see it, sometimes I have to point that out. I was like, did you see these 3 students that constantly used to ask you questions? They went right. Oh, I never thought about that. Yeah, that's a win. I mean, I kind of think we always play cheerleader too. We're always there to push teachers to be the very best them or you, but we're always there to encourage and jump up and down and give them that virtual pat on the back, because oftentimes they really need to hear those things, especially in this kind of circumstance where they're working with a coach they've never met, they're trying new things. They need to be encouraged so that they'll continue to try those new things.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that also happens is sometimes, sadly, by the time we're contacted, because time does pass, the principal or the administrators, they're going to try to handle this on their own. internally, right? And they're going to try they try the EMT approach, where somebody dashes down to settle things down. They try the too many cooks in the stew approach. They try a lot of things before they come to us. And by the time sometimes we get those teachers, they are downtrodden. They have lost their confidence. They haven't heard too many positives about what they're doing, and they become really discouraged. And I know one of our virtual coaches just recently, one of the comments that we had from their supervisor was that this was a teacher who I feel sure was about to quit. And not only is this now a teacher who wants to stay in teaching, but has been revitalized and recharged and has the confidence and the belief and the faith that they can move forward and do a really great job for kids. And so that's the beauty. I think that the more we do this, the more I really feel like we are improving or changing our profession one teacher at a time. And I think that's really how it has to be. I think it has to be personalized, and it has to be consistent, and it has to be short and intense. And I think those are all the things we take care of through our virtual coaching cycle. So we do have a couple of participants, and I've failed. I've neglected as the facilitator of this web vlog. I've failed to ask if anybody wants to ask us any questions in the chat. If you would like to ask us questions in the chat, please feel free to do that. We will attend to those questions as we're nearing the end of our vlog for today. I do have a couple of more questions for Kelley and things that I want to ask and talk about, but we would also entertain any questions from you, and TJ is going to be helping us out and calling that to our attention. I'll also be watching the chat too, so please feel free to ask us any questions about that. So Kelley, as we finish up then, I do want to ask you through the lens of the coach, the coachee, and the administrator. So let's talk about the role of the administrator in the virtual coaching process. I can tell you from my end, at the beginning of the process is when I most work with the supervisor or the administrator. They come to us. We do a little vetting with them. As I said, we're not in the business of trying to get rid of teachers at all. And if that's what their intention is, they want to use us as part of the paperwork or one of the RTIs in order to be able to release this teacher, we're not interested in that. But I will have to say that I haven't had a single supervisor that I felt came to us with that intent. Mm-hmm. So they come to us, we ask them to complete an information sheet for that teacher that they want us to work with, and that information sheet asks them to talk to us about what the strengths of that teacher are, and sometimes that's left blank. We ask them to talk about some of the areas that need to be worked on and those handoff goals they'd like for us to work on. We ask what those teachers are involved in. Sometimes they're the basketball coach, or they're the cheerleading supervisor, or they're the chess club organizer. They're doing other things in the school that might be contributing a little bit to. And sometimes when they write down that teacher's schedule, there are 3 or 4 preps that they're working with. So there's lots of things going on, and that information sheet helps us to understand what some of those things are as well. And so we get that information sheet, and we get just that first glimpse of what some of the needs of the teachers are, and then we do that matching up or pairing up with our virtual coach. So let me hand this off to you now, because when you get that coachee, when you get the teacher who needs to be coached, where do you see, how do we include the supervisor or the principal or administrator within that process after I've handed that off to you?
So after one of my responsibilities every week is to turn in a coaching report, and I tell the coachee, and this is true, that it is a very objective document that I fill out. That it is not going to go into depth of some of the sometimes serious in nature conversations we have about students and whatever. That's not going to go in there. But we just need to let that administrator know that, hey, we are following through. Here are the expectations for the week. Here's kind of their homework, although I don't really like that term, but here's what they need to accomplish, and when I'm going to accomplish these goals, and when they're going to accomplish these goals. And then at the bottom, we also list the resources that we want that coachee to look at. Now, I don't bombard any teacher with a ton of resources. I think it's too much. So I try to pick just 1 or 2 little things that they can review and that we can talk about, because I do want to talk about those pieces the following week. And if you give them too much, it's going to be too much. So, and oftentimes that administrator will take a look at those resources that we provide, and possibly some have used them in their own professional development because they are strong resources that Sibme does provide. At the end of the cycle, so we do that for every single week, and at the end of the cycle, after all 6 sessions are completed, we have a phone conversation with that administrator. And the conversations have all been uniquely different. Many of them, some of them last 30, 40 minutes, some of them last 15, 20 minutes. Either way, it's still wonderful. But we talk about some of the growth that we've seen. And honestly, it's been a love fest every single time I've had one. The teachers, all of the teachers that I've worked with are just absolutely inspiring and wonderful, and have really shown significant growth and built that confidence. And that administrator has paid attention and seen that kind of growth, and are very, very pleased with the process. And then oftentimes I end with, what's next? It's the so what. And what are we going to do, or what is the administration in the school going to do to continue to support that teacher? And we have a good conversation about that, because although I feel confident that I hand off the baton appropriately and they're ready to go, they're still going to need that confidence boost. They're still going to need observations. They're still going to need resources and strategies to put in their toolkit. And so we end typically with that conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. So let's take a look now through the lens of the coachee, and then I think we're going to do a little closure together today. But looking through the lens of the coachee, so from our perspective, then we get that information sheet that the supervisor shares with us, so we have the gist of what this person is teaching, what the greatest areas of need are, what their strengths are, what other interventions have been tried with that teacher, so we do ask that. And so we have an idea of what else they've done before they've come to us. And then our school liaison contacts the coachee and begins the onboarding process. And by the way, we try to be as transparent as possible with the coachee, and that is, we actually encourage the administrator or supervisor to CC the coachee when they share that information sheet. We want it to be transparent. Not always do we get there, but we want it to be transparent that we haven't made these goals up to work with them on. These are the goals that we were given by the administration. And so our school liaison works with those with the coachee. We have a landing page that's got some videos and resources on how to use the Sibme platform. Because it is a technology platform, we are asking these coachees to submit probably in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 snapshot videos over the course of the 6 weeks. So we are asking them to use the technology. And so the school liaison sort of onboards them into the coaching process, also make sure they're going to be successful with the Sibme technology part of things. And it's a pretty simple process. It's an app on their phone. They videotape their lessons. They copy those lessons from a workspace to their huddle, and then they view in their huddle the comments and the feedback that they've been given by the coach. And they have the opportunity of replying to that feedback as well, by the way, as you well know. They can also send their video with comments loaded on it, so that when the coach receives that video, that snapshot video, the coach can see that the coachee has been reflective before sharing that video. So it's not always just, I'm the coach and I'm giving you feedback on what I see. I'd like for you to be reflective and share that reflection with me when you share the video. But that feedback can be conversational. It can go back and forth. There's a reply button. So it's not just one and done. It is a conversation that can occur. We're really making every moment a teachable moment because of the time-stamped feedback we can offer. So if we do see that moment in time that's associated with the goal, which is the hope, and oftentimes the reality, then we can explode that moment and really talk deeply about that moment, because we have the video evidence, we have the ability to go back and forth with that conversation. And that's really one of the great beauties of having the Sibme platform. So after the coachee has been onboarded, we ask them to have 2, I know you don't like to use homework, so I'll say home fun assignments. And those two home fun assignments before they begin to work with the coach, we ask them to do a 360, which you alluded to. So we want to see the setup of the classroom, because we know sometimes that the way the classroom is set up can either add to the problem or help to resolve the problem. I've seen some pretty I've seen some pretty interesting classroom setups that I immediately requested a change in. That was contributing in a major way to the problem. Situations where the way the teacher had the document camera set up required the teacher's back to be to the class the entire time. I mean, it's just not good. It's just not going to be good. It's not going to be pretty. So we ask for that 360 so that our coach can get a sense of what the classrooms look like. And sometimes the coaches we work with are traveling teachers. So they're maybe in 3 or 4 different classrooms, which makes it interesting. And then we also ask for them to submit an introduction video. And so when you begin that coaching process, those 2 videos should be in your coaching huddle. You've looked at those videos. You've seen us share with you a report as to what our goals are. And now we're ready for the coaching to begin. So from the lens of a coachee, what does this process look like?
Well, I'm sure they're quite nervous at first, but like I said, at the beginning, the coachee does most of the talking. The coachee is constantly taking notes. Oftentimes, I don't tell them they have to, but I really like when they do. We problem solve quite a bit of issues through the process, and what I've noticed is I don't want to say I lead the conversation the first one, but I ask a lot of leading questions to try to get them to open up to me a little bit and be a bit reflective on their process. So they will do most of the talking, but I'm leading them I'm facilitating that conversation in a major way. Whereas later on in the conversations, they tend to, I simply start this is no secret. I start every conversation with, how's it going this week? That's all. That simple question can just open up so many doors and so many conversations. Some coaches want to jump right in to talk about the videos. They want to talk about the videos immediately. And then others want to talk about maybe something that happened that day, or maybe they went on a field trip, and maybe there was some, a student issue or a parent concern. And so whatever is on their mind, if that trust has been built, they will immediately share out. And through that, again, I always think of it as coaching with myself, at least, as, I have an end goal in mind, and that maze every week looks a little bit different, but I still have an end goal in mind of what I want to discuss and what I want to work with. So it's me figuring out the best way to get there and support that teacher effectively. And we get there every time, but we also sometimes are incorporating some more conversations. But all in all, I still try as a coach to have it end with our goals in mind. And that coachee, I think, I try to make sure that the coachee feels that he or she has been able to share everything that they want to share. Even if it's somewhat unrelated, oftentimes it is related, and they just don't see that it is related to some of the things that we're working on in our goals. So I hope that through the process, the coachee feels continually like they are being heard, and that they are being listened to, and that they are building their toolkit, and they are building their confidence. So that's what I hope. I want to jump into each of the coachee and kind of see what they're thinking, but that's what I hope that they're thinking through the process. And from our feedback, I really feel strongly that they are feeling that way.
Yep, we're getting some really good feedback. We're using a SurveyMonkey as each coaching cycle ends and getting really good feedback around that. So Kelley, just as a closure, I have to have a closure activity, right?
Well, so it's right to do. It's appropriate.
as our closure today, I'm going to ask you, we're going to play a little back and forth here, a little ping pong, and I'm going to ask you to finish a sentence. I'll model it for you first, though, and so that's going to be the stem of the sentence.
Good.
The stem of the sentence is a virtual coach is a... And I'm going to complete the first one for you, and then it's going to be your turn. We'll go back and forth as long as we can until it becomes ridiculous. So here we go. A virtual coach is a Sherpa.
A virtual coach is a cheerleader.
A virtual coach is an advocate.
A virtual coach is a listener.
A virtual coach is a way shower. I think we better stop. Do you have one more?
I was going to say a virtual coach is a guide. Oh, you kind of said Sherpa. I might be running out, but I've got a lot more in here. You just got to give me a second.
I think you want some wait time.
I know I need wait time.
Kelley, it's been delightful. It's always delightful to see you. We've had a long-running relationship, 7 years plus, and it's always delightful to see you and work with you. And I appreciate the time you've taken today with us to talk about this really important service that we offer, our Sibme virtual coaching service. Anything you want to say to bring closure then?
No, just anybody that's listening. This is just a wonderful opportunity for teachers to grow and to, for some, ignite that spirit that's within them to be the amazing teacher that they know they are. And I really hope that you'll consider this just momentous, beautiful opportunity to watch your watch your teachers bloom into something spectacular.
Thank you. And so that's going to be it for us today. Thanks for joining us on our vlog, and we hope that you found some of the information today to be of value to you as you think about how you're going to support those struggling teachers in your building, or those struggling teachers that you know. I hope you'll contact us. Thank you so much.